the lands between is becoming dimmer. The light of the Erdtree is threatening to be dissipated, cast aside by the dark, looming shadow of the Erdtree. This video was meant to be out before Shadow of the Erdtree DLC was released, but I kind of missed that boat. So this video is a bit of an outdated time capsule, preparing players for what could be held in the Land of Shadow. We'll be focusing on exploring topics potentially tied to this new DLC and seemingly pivotal character, Miquella, one stripped of flesh who travelled to this Land of Shadow. But we'll be trying to avoid spoilers about the DLC and mainly talking about events happening within the base game. We will be mentioning promotional material and a couple of minor comments, but for each of these mentions there'll be a spoiler warning with timestamps where you can skip to if you want to avoid all of these spoilers. So let's illuminate these dark passages and dive once again into the large expanse of this Elden Ring iceberg. And maybe the best place to start our discussions is the gateway to the Shadowlands, Mohgwyn Palace. Small spoilers for the DLC. Director Hidetaka Miyazaki stated in the Famitsu interview that the entrance to the Shadowlands can be found in the battle area of Mohg, the Lord of Blood, through a cocoon's dangling arm. This cocoon was already here before the DLC had been released, and it housed the body of Miquella. Cursed with eternal youth, Miquella devoted his time to find ways to rid his own curse and those that afflicted his siblings. The Halig Tree Knight armour states that Miquella used his own blood to water a Halig Tree sapling in the hopes that it would grow into an Erdtree. It was planned that Miquella would become one with the Halig Tree, growing with it, ridding him of his own curse.
I heard speculation Miquella embedded himself in the Halig Tree, but before he could finish, someone cut the tree open and absconded with his infant form.
This abscondment can be unravelled through the description of the remembrance of the Blood Lord. Wishing to raise Miquella to full godhood, Mohg wishes to be his consort, taking the role of monarch. But no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber he tried to share, he received no response from the young Imperium. Mohg had whisked Miquella away, harbouring his cocoon in his own palace, using his chambers as his own. The Lord of Blood's exaltation states the followers of Mohg are to render up their offerings of blood to the Lord, drenching his consort's chambers, to slake the cocoon's thirst. His awakening shall herald the dawn of our dynasty. But Miquella never awoke, and when the Tarnish arrives at Mohgwyn Palace, they can only see Mohg emerging from the cocoon's pool of blood. And this display of Mohg may have given some players a sense of deja vu. Mohg is the twin brother of Morgott, the Omen King, with both of them having the curse of the Omen, being abominations and worthy of scorn. Margit's shackle states that these Omen were bound by shackles, and these ones were made to keep a particular Omen under the strictest confinement. The Regal Omen band states that the Omen are kept underground, unbeknownst to anyone, imprisoned for eternity. And underground at the subterranean chanting grounds is where we can find Mohg, the Omen. A variant of Mohg, Lord of Blood, it seems like Mohg is in two locations, and many like Govlin 1996 believe that this Omen counterpart is not in fact Mohg, but just an illusion. Both Margit and Mohg were shackled as Omens, down the subterranean chanting grounds, but both seemingly escaped their shackles, and due to their cursed, grotesque forms, remained hidden, with illusions concealing their true form, and even their location. Margit, the Fell Omen, is the guise of Morgott, the Omen King, who if killed will dispel the presence of Margit the Fell Omen at Stormvale Castle. Although strangely, a doubly disguised Margit, posing as a commoner, will still remain at the capital outskirts. As his remembrance retells, even through his fall as a scorned Omen, he took it upon himself to become the Erdtree's protector, but did so in secret, being its veiled monarch.
Morgott, the Grace-given, veiled monarch and Lord of Leyndell.
Mohg also had his true identity as the Lord of Blood hidden with the help of his placement of his illusion, which some believe is given away due to the frustrating fact that the Omen is immune to every kind of status. But what's a bit more telling is the soundtrack behind the battle with Mohg, poetically titled Omen Illusion. Some, like Lord Charisman, believes that this illusionary Mohg is a construct created by Margit, who created this illusion as an extra barrier to discourage the Tarnish from reaching the Three Fingers. If Mohg the Omen is defeated, while Morgott is still alive, the path beyond Mohg is sealed by Morgott the Grace-given, perhaps being another spell. But I think it's more likely, like Govlin 1996 suggests, that Mohg himself created the illusion. The Lord of Blood's identity remained anonymous to all, with not even Gideon knowing his identity.
The one only known as the Lord of Blood.
The kidnapping of Miquella was despicable and horrified many in the lands between, and this horror would have most likely included people like his valiant brother Morgott. So Mohg created this illusion to fool even his brother, succumbing to his bloodlust and growing his perverse cult under the title of Lord of Blood. Xali the Witch proposes a bit more of a meta answer to the puzzle of multiple Mohgs, and is that Mohg might not have actually been planned to be a named character, or even a boss. His model is titled as the Greater Demon, and it can be found on the load list of many different areas, like Murkwater Catacombs and Raya Lucaria. Mohg's model also has an attachment for riding, with Xali proposing that Mohg may have initially been made as an enemy to ride the chariots roaming the heroes' graves, and that would have made a very formidable foe. Finton9218 notes the similarity of the name Mohg to a druid of Irish mythology, Mohg Ruith. Mohg Ruith was a blind yet powerful druid. His name means slave of the wheel, and he was often depicted atop a chariot, and when he rode it, night became as bright as day. Similar to an omen, Mohg Ruith also wore a bull hide, and that became hornless. Some tales state that Mohg Ruith lost an eye, becoming a mound of snow in the high mountains, while Mohg had one of his own horns, uncut, gouging out his own eye. Mohg Ruith was said to have even caused blood to rain from the sky, which could be another parallel to the Lord of Blood. The Lord of Blood, one who rises from the blood of Miquella to face the Tarnished.
Dearest Miquella, you must abide alone a while.
It seems like a very particular choice of words by Mohg. He's either in connection with the physical cocoon to Miquella, or his connections with him and the Land of Shadow. And after the Tarnished defeats the Lord of Blood, Miquella could indeed have been released from Mohg's shadow. But maybe that's not completely true. Some, like Underhill and Cursed69420, believe that Mohg may have not been killed upon being defeated, but is actually still alive, returning back to the blood from which he was beckoned. Unlike the illusion of Margit, who does not appear if Morgott has been defeated, Mohg the Omen remains even if his Lord of Blood counterpart is defeated. When many of the main bosses are defeated, they often leave a part of themselves behind. Godric leaves his torso behind, Rykard leaves his face, and perhaps more telling, Morgott leaves behind his shriveled body, a stark contrast to the once glorious boss we had to defeat. But Mohg doesn't seem to leave anything behind, unless this blood is his own, now forever in flames. But when Mohg is defeated, he does drop his great rune, one soaked in accursed blood, from his devout love for the wretched mire that he was born into, far below the earth. And his last gasp of breath before he perishes does seem pretty realistic, so he could very much be dead.
I can see it, as clear as day.
But would his dynasty continue to live on without him? A group known as the Bloody Fingers cautiously followed Mohg, being promised strength through the sacrificing of blood. There are many Bloody Fingers throughout the lands between, one whose hands are perpetually covered in blood, white mask Vare, and even one from places as obscure as the land of reeds, Bloody Finger Okina. Okina originally had used his katana against Mohg, the Lord of Blood, but when Mohg first felt Okina's sword, and his madness, upon his flesh, he had a proposal to offer Okina the life of a demon, whose thirst would never go unsated. So Okina renounced everything, rising to a higher plane, with just himself, his katana, and his mastery. His katana became cursed, becoming the Rivers of Blood. In the Japanese version of Elden Ring, Rivers of Blood's full name is actually Mountain of Corpses, Rivers of Blood. And many, like Shura the Soul Eater, sees this as a key connection to Sekiro, with the Lands of Reeds being Elden's Ring reference to Sekiro. Like Elden Ring, Sekiro has multiple endings, and one of them is known as the Shura ending. The memory of Shura is told via Oshina's folk song, Fields of Bodies, Mountains of Dead, down Dragon Spring River, our country bled, a fiery god, demon wolf in red. In Buddhism, Asura are beings who can broadly be defined as a monstrous semi-divine, one who's obsessed with violence, wrath, and a hunger for fighting. In reference to Sekiro, Asuras become consumed by the thirst for blood, forsaking their humanity for a path of carnage and destruction. And this can definitely be paralysed with Okina, being consumed by bloodlust, or even catalysed by Mohg's tempting ways.
They are tarnished, held in thrall by cessblood, zealots who stalk their own.
Bloody Finger Hunter Yura could also have come from the Lands of Reeds, having worn the Iron Casa, crafted to imitate the woven straw hats worn in the Land of Reeds. Invigorated with the downfall of the Bloody Fingers, Yura dedicates his life to taking out the Bloody Fingers one by one, saving the Tarnished from the ambush of Bloody Finger Nereus.
If it isn't Nereus, the Bloody Finger,
Before hunting the Bloody Fingers, it seems that he used to hunt something different. Dragons, which he reminisces when he helps the Tarnished fight off the flying dragon Agheel.
There you are. That was my first dragon hunt in quite some time. Paired up with a hothead like you, it was just like old times.
Yura hints that he used to hunt dragons with another, and this relationship could add complications to his fight against the Bloody Finger. As the Tarnished encounters Yura throughout the lands between, he talks about one Bloody Finger slightly different.
I'm dying to see you. Eleonora, Violet Bloody Finger. She is the deadliest of all Bloody Fingers. She's felled many an old hand already, but in spite of her cessblood zealotry, Eleonora is a proud knight. If she comes for you, do not think twice. You must flee. There is no shame in self-preservation.
Yura's Iron Castle states that he kept a woman in the deepest reaches of his heart, and this could very well be Eleonora. Eleonora is found wielding Eleonora's pole blade, a twin Naginata forged in the land of reeds. She wears the Drake Knight armour, a black iron armour worn by Drake Knights. It features the spoils of a dragon catch as an emblem of pride, as both dragon hunter and partaker of the communion, whose seal Eleonora also wields. It seems like Eleonora was not just a Bloody Finger, but also a dragon hunter, with perhaps Yura gifting her a weapon from his homeland, which became stained, along with her legacy, by a cursed blood. But arguably the most peculiar part of this story occurs at the Second Church of Marika, where Yura is mortally wounded after an encounter with Eleonora.
Eleonora, it seems I am no match for you, but I've learned a thing or two myself. You see, I've sliced the finger off. Please, Eleonora, yield to the cessblood no longer. Do not stain the immaculacy of your sword, your flesh, your fire.
It seems like there is a way to combat the thralls of the Lord of Blood's wretched beckoning, but it's a bit unclear as to how Yura has enacted this. Some, like Hank the Yank 27, believe that Yura was himself influenced by the Bloody Finger, that managed to cut off his own finger, escaping its influence over him. And this is why he is charged with taking down other fingers, because he wants to save those close to his heart, and others that have fallen into the same trap as him, wanting to put them out of their misery, or saving them. But others believe that the finger that Yura cut off was actually Eleonora's, releasing her from the Lord of Blood's influence. After this revelation with Yura, Eleonora invades the Tarnished, thus ending her own story, so her potential redemption arc remains clouded. Upon death, she drops not only her pole blade, but the purifying crystal tear. A crystal tear forms slowly over the age, where the Erdtree's bounty falls to the ground. The resulting concoction purifies the curse from Mohg, Lord of Blood's terrifying rite of blood. Zalia the Witch went through the hidden NPC faces of Elden Ring, and like Varde, the other Bloody Fingers have tattoos, perhaps marking them as bound to their Lord of Blood, while the Bloody Fingers Ravenmount and Nereus also have blood-infused eyes. But Eleonora seems to lack both the bloody eyes and marks of the Bloody Fingers, and this leads to the very unfounded theory that Eleonora had planned to betray Mohg, perhaps kind of being a morally askew Bloody Finger hunter herself. Then it wouldn't really explain her betrayal and killing of Yura. Eleonora is also a Dragon Knight though, participating in the Dragon Communion, consuming dragon hearts to become more powerful. However, the Magma Wyrn Scale Swords warns that their namesake, land-bound dragons, were once human heroes who also partook in the Dragon Communion, but this was a grave transgression for which they were cursed to crawl the earth upon their bellies, becoming shadows of their former selves. So Eleonora could have become cursed, frenzied, and full of bloodlust as a side effect by this Dragon Communion, as opposed to it just being the Lord of Blood's temptation. Maybe this tussle between the two factions led to her not being fully committed to the Bloody Fingers. Eleonora does have a slightly different title to the other Bloody Fingers. She's the Violet's Bloody Finger. Maybe this Violet is important. Snook Calculations 5015 relates this Violet to death, with a title given to the most deadly Bloody Finger.
Yes, I've been tracking Eleonora for quite some time. She is the deadliest of all Bloody Fingers.
A purple flower found blooming in the graveyard, the Grey Violet is the hue of ghost flame, believed to be useful in calling forth spirits. Violet could also be in reference to the violet-tinged dragon wing membrane that appears on Eleonora's Drake Knight armour, and this would be an apt name when describing Eleonora's tussle between being a Drake Knight and a Bloody Finger. And a small spoiler for the Shadow of the Erdtree, but perhaps Eleonora's story will become more unravelled with this new content. Mesmer the Impaler seems to be wearing a similar armour to the Drake Knight set, so maybe Eleonora indeed did plan to kill Mohg, and was actually being sent to retrieve Miquella's body in the Land of Shadows, which is why we see her with a purifying crystal tear. In Hawkshaw's colour theory of Elden Ring video, he relates many purple materials, like soporific grease, to the infliction of sleep. The Tibia Mariner has notable use of purple, one that brings the dead back into this world, and they fade in and out of the world that's the land between. It's highly likely that they are strongly linked to the Charon of Greek mythology, the ferrymen who transport the dead across the river into the underworld. Although the tibia are corrupted by a source that gives rise to those who live in death, the Death Root, but they still seem to be a portal between life and death, and the dreamlike sleep that purple symbolises. Miquella himself could indeed just be sleeping, as Gideon remarks.
If he continues his slumber within the cocoon, all would be well, but perhaps it would be safer to destroy it. Miquella is the one thing that remains a mystery to me.
The mystery of Miquella is currently clouded, with the Land of Shadow key to unlocking his secrets. But despite this, B-Joe-07 and Treks from Outer Space have formulated a peculiar theory that we may know more about Miquella than we think, because we, the Tarnished, are Miquella. Many parallels can be seen between the Tarnished and Miquella. Radagon's Rings of Light is a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father Radagon. And yet the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Melania's accursed rot. Miquella turned against the Golden Order, stripping himself of his flesh. The Tarnished themselves is also alien to the Golden Order.
Don't worry, Torrent. Fortune is on her side. We found her here after all, even if it does violate the Golden Order.
Torrent is bestowed to the Tarnished, a spectral steed with an unknown past. The Tarnished is also given the spirit calling bell from Rani.
I was entrusted this for thee by Torrent's former master. 'Tis a bell for calling forth spirits. Summon them with it from ash and return to the Erdtree.
And some, like Frisky Boy, believe that Torrent's former master is also Miquella. And this theory has some spoilers from the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer. In the teaser for the Shadow of the Erdtree, Miquella is seen riding a steed that is at least very similar to Torrent. Melania also presumably gives you another artifact of Torrent's previous owner, the Spectral Steed Whistle, which is a delicate goldwork ring. When Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, it was the beginning of unalloyed gold. It's not exactly clear what unalloyed gold could mean. An alloy is a metal that's the combination of more than one element, or mixes a metal with another non-metal element. For example, the brass shield, commonly employed in the Shattering, has its face covered in brass, which is an alloy from copper and zinc. And if we were to take this literally, unalloyed gold could just mean pure gold. Melania's armour is made up of unalloyed gold, as could this Spectral Steed Whistle. But more importantly is the unalloyed gold needle, a needle that's capable of warding away the outer gods, and thought to be capable of forestalling the incurable rotting sickness. With this, the unalloyed gold might not just mean pure gold, it could be a symbol to signify Miquella's power. Crafted by Miquella, these unalloyed gold needles could allow one to cheat fate, defying the gods. So maybe like Sprinkle's sad 3867 thinks, this unalloyed gold could actually be unaligned gold, gold that has not been tainted by the presence of another god, being unbound. But even if Torrent's former master was not Miquella, or the current master, the Tarnished could still be Miquella. Quite a rare consumable, the Bewitching Branch is a tree branch blessed with an incantation of unalloyed gold. The Imperium Miquella is loved by many people. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection. This branch can pierce a foe and temporarily turn them into an ally. Such was the compelling power of Miquella. Many in the lands between favoured Miquella, from some as close to him as his blade and sister, Melania, to a simple finger reader crone, who mentions Miquella's favour at the Raya Lucario Academy's bridge.
Oh, bless you. Miquella's favour can be yours.
It's quite weird when discussing the Erdtree Secret Medallion that the crone finger pointedly mentions Miquella. B-Joe-07 examined the Japanese subtitles, which mentions that the Tarnished has a connection to Miquella. It almost seems eerily similar. The Tarnished certainly seems well loved within the lands between.
Not only are you a superb fighter, but people want to trust you. I've seen it.
One summon, the Stormhawk King, mentions that the Ashes of this hawk was proud and refuses to answer anyone summoned. This means that all of the Tarnished summons could be an optional calling, with the spirits deciding whether to answer the bell. Maybe all these spirits were compelled with such affection. Roderica seems to notice this when giving the Tarnished the spirit jellyfish ashes.
The spirits look rather fondly upon you.
It's all quite vague, and this theory fog will definitely be dispelled by the DLC, one way or the other. But let's venture through this fog, going forth into a new layer of discovery, the Lake of Rot. As old as legend, scarlet rot plagues the lands between, infesting both man and beast, causing them to go mad.
General Radahn is cursed ever to wander, eaten from the inside by Melania's scarlet rot. His wits are long gone. Now he gathers the corpses of former friends and foes alike, gorging on them like a dog, howling at the sky.
Like how Miquella was born with the affliction of being stuck a child, his sister Melania was afflicted with scarlet rot, rotting from within. And Miquella was not only trying to reverse his own curse that he was born into, he was also trying to cure his sister's debilitating curse, creating an unalloyed gold needle that could halt the spreading of scarlet rot. A small spoiler for the new DLC, but Miyazaki has hinted that there's going to be a new sort of poison swamp that will be terrorizing us yet again in these new lands. So perhaps looking into this scarlet rot, an existing lake of poison, will provide beneficial. And this rot was terrorizing Melania. But even so, she became a fierce and renowned warrior, while keeping the scarlet rot at bay. However, this all changed with her battle against Radahn.
The dignity, the sense of self that allowed her to resist the call of the scarlet rot, the pride she abandoned to meet Radahn's measure.
Melania's scarlet rot bloomed, exploding the curse throughout Caelid, advancing Melania's rot. Caelid was devastated, with this land and all those who occupied it seemingly rotting away, with only the scarlet rot remaining to thrive. The Ashen One noted the fauna left remaining on Caelid being monstrous dogs and crows, and noticed how similar they looked, with the cross losing their feathers and seemingly having fur growing. And with this, they proposed that the crows have evolved by scarlet rot into becoming the monstrous dogs. They pointed out one attack that is very similar between the dogs and the crows, with them both pecking at the ground with their faces, which is quite unusual for a dog to do. But I'm not too sure if this theory is that believable. Slamming your face into the ground is something that a dog with an incredibly massive head would actually do. Monstrous dogs and crows can also both be found over at the mountain tops of the giants. Ashen One does speculate that the crows would have had to have migrated from Caelid to the mountaintops to get away from the scarlet rot, as the mountaintops is visible from Caelid. But a crow that can barely hold itself above the ground would surely find it hard to fly across a large expanse to the highest peaks of the lands between. Many prefer to believe the scarlet rot hasn't caused a mutation from the crows to the dogs, and that the mountaintops of the giants and Caelid were perhaps once connected, having land or a bridge spanning across on what we can now only see as a cloud in the middle of the Divine Tower arrangement. In part 2 of our Elden Ring discussion, we discussed alchemy, the Ripley Scroll, and the foundation that it plays in Elden Ring, the role of this middle cloud perhaps playing some sort of significance, but perhaps unrelating to the alchemical restoration of the Elden Ring, and perhaps it's something else that shaped the lands between. The Tarnished archaeologist has a theory that perhaps the monstrous crows and dogs were able to travel across this clouded expanse from the mountaintops to Caelid, until their path was quickly shattered, with a huge water expanse being created by an impact crater. It might be hard to tell from an in-game display, but concept art of the Elden Ring map definitely shows a crater appearing right in the middle of the lands between. The Divine Towers found around this supposed crater, each partially covered by some sort of dried volcanic rock. It must be important, as both the concept art and even the map icons contain this cooled rock. Lava ferociously being spread to all of these Divine Towers would seem to make sense, coming from some sort of meteor or star, creating a massive impact on the lands between. But the Tarnished archaeologist notes that the sides of the Divine Tower that contain this cooled rock do not all point to the same source, which means there must have been multiple sources, which causes volcanic spews. But with very large impacts, this kind of multi-source destruction is possible. The University of California, Berkeley, studied an event known as the End Cretaceous mass extinction, where about 70% of all species in the fossil record went extinct. They think this was most likely caused by the Chicxulub meteor, which struck the Earth in Mexico. However, curiously, at the same time, catastrophic volcanic eruptions were occurring at one of the largest volcanic features on Earth, located in India, the Deccan Traps. They believe that the impact was so large, it might have directly contributed to an increase in the intensity of the Deccan volcanic activity, with the Tarnished archaeologists believing this is also what happened in the lands between. And this kind of global impact could also lead to another similarity we see between Caelid and the mountaintops of the giants, giant fossils. As Lakeho was one of the first to suggest, when this cataclysmic meteor came crashing down, the true larger giants, the one who used the giant forge, were decimated, with both them and their lands being crushed by the might of the universe. Like usual, we've gotten ourselves distracted from the original point. I don't know how we've done it, but we've started talking about meteors fossilising the ancient giants, which did happen long before the blooming of Scarlet Rot, but each of them do have a thing in common: death. And instead of a sudden impact of rocks upon Earth, Scarlet Rot has an impact as its bloom, with the Scarlet Aeonia stating that Melania's rot has blossomed twice already. With the third bloom, she will become a true goddess. Self-confessed mushroom fanatic, the Mura, noticed a visual similarity between the Scarlet Aeonia and the mushroom devil's fingers, and believes that this is an ominous sign that the Scarlet Rot is inevitably going to destroy all life in the lands between. Mushrooms begin as a spore, and if landing in an ideal place of high humidity, it begins growing, feeding on dead and decaying matter. And once they've attained enough nutrients, they begin fruiting, forming what we recognise as mushrooms. The mushrooms then begin to release spores, repeating its cycle. The land of Caelid contains many remains, along with an acidic swamp. The blooming of Melania, like a mushroom, led to the release of Scarlet Rot, with its hunger being so ferocious that it can eat not just the dead, but living things, infecting all around it. The Halig tree itself is infected and being devoured by the rot, and maybe it's only a matter of time before more of the land between is going to be consumed by Scarlet Rot, maybe even the Erdtree. But Science Fiction Guy does make a good point. Scarlet Rot won't technically destroy all life. The Scarlet Rot also creates life, like the kindred of Rot. Rot for the Scarlet Goddess. O Scarlet Blossoms, flourish in distant lands, and return to us, the unwanted children. This Goddess of Rot could become a more formidable foe in the DLC, or maybe a new curse will be making its appearance. But Scarlet Rot isn't even the only wretched disease infecting the lands between, and to find out more, we must travel below Leandel, to the Erdtree Roots. And it's here, deep underground, that we can find the Prince of Death, the one who used to be called Godwyn. Godwyn's death was the first recorded death of a demigod, brought on by his stepsister Rani, who stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, forging it with a weapon that could fell the demigods, the Black Knife. This death resulted in the carving of the curse mark of death. But Rani had a scheme along with this murder, a plot to break free from the influence of the meddling fingers and the greater will. If she was to die at the same time, she could break this curse mark into half. Rani was one of the first demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone. But as it was just Godwyn's soul that perished, he was unable to die a proper death, and Godwyn's body was transformed into another deadly curse. And as always, Miquella attempted to cure Godwyn, but to no avail. Godwyn became corrupted, with the Rune of Death spreading across the land between, in its form as Deathroot, with the underground roots of the Erdtree the vessel for spreading. This corrupts those who come into contact with it, and if the tarnish dies due to a build-up of death blight, their body explodes into streaks of roots, similar to Godwyn's husk of a body. There seems to be a deep connection between death blights and these roots, with the roots already having a huge symbolic significance in Elden Ring, like the Greek and Norse mythology is inspired after, and it depicts the roots representing the connection with the realms of both the dead and even the divine. Similar to Tibia Marina, which is our representation of the ferryman of Hades in Greek mythology. These roots could be another connection into another world, succumbing to death blight. And spoilers for the new DLC, but in its promotional material we can see the Shadow Tree wrapping itself around the Erdtree, effectively trying to weigh it down. But Golem Newton noticed that this tree would actually look much better if it was seen as a root network. The Land of Shadow is said to be the birthplace of the Erdtree, so it would make sense if these were effectively its roots. But could these roots, these Land of Shadow, be affected by Deathroot, the corruption caused by Godwyn's body? Zali the Witch also noticed something quite peculiar about these Deathblight roots. As they appear on its host, worms and insects would burst forth from the Deathblighted individual, as if they were created by Deathblight. And Zali related this to the alchemical theory of spontaneous generation, disproven by Francesco Redi in 1668. It was believed that maggots used to spontaneously form from dead things, instead of the now known observation of flies laying microscopic eggs. While it could be a reference to this belief, it's hard to tie a symbolic reference to it. Maybe just a meta clue that we don't fully understand how Deadlight works yet, or maybe it has loose connection to mythology. The goddess of the dead, Persephone, was abducted by the king of the underworld, Hades. The Homeric hymn to Demeter details how Demeter, Persephone's mother, would search everywhere to find her missing daughter, until she was told that Hades had taken her to the underworld. Devastated, Demeter neglected her duties as the goddess of harvest, agriculture, and fertility of the earth, leaving the earth barren. However, Zeus ordered Hades to return Persephone back to her mother, but because she had eaten the symbol of the indissolubility of marriage, pomegranate seed, she had to spend time each year in the underworld with Hades. The seasons are linked to Persephone's whereabouts, and the letting go of earth in autumn, and the covering it with snow in winter, is the tragedy of Persephone's absence. While the renewal of life and blossoming of flowers and crops represent Persephone's return in the spring. Insects play a crucial role in Persephone's story, being the pollinators and catalyzer of blooming flowers in spring, like the bursting forth of a butterfly from a cocoon, and the absence of a presence in winter, being the cycle of life. But in Elden Ring's case, it seems that the coming forth of insects is brought by the decay of those infected by deathblight, and even other curses such as scarlet rot. H9419 looked closer to the Eclipse Shotel, a weapon that can set the lustreless sun ablaze with the Prince of Death's flames, inflicting the death ailment upon foes. It mentioned that the story's sword depicts an eclipsed sun that is drained of its colour, and he noted the original Japanese description could actually be interpreted as the sun being eaten during an eclipse, with this description then translating that it resembles a sun that was eaten into and lost its colour. And maybe this eating of the sun was caused by worms. But it does seem like we're reaching here. I don't know Japanese myself, but I managed to crawl around the internet until I found an interesting article on the Japanese Stack Exchange, where JPG asked about the eclipse kanji, and whether it's reasonable to assume that it could be taken as the sun or moon being eaten during an eclipse. Drews replied that it'd be more accurate if it was interpreted for its second meaning, developed in Old Chinese, and that meant corrosion being worn away. Like in English how acid can eat away at a metal, in similar it's how an eclipse can eat away the sun or a moon. So a more correct translation would be that the Eclipse Shotel is one of the legendary weapons that resembles a sun that has been eroded and lost its colour. But maybe it does have more symbolic connections than meets the eye. Worms are seen elsewhere in the lands between, with worm faces being riddled throughout. They cough up clouds of deathblight, hinting that they could have been affected by the deadly corruption. They are named in the files as Déraciner, which is French for someone who has been uprooted from their natural environment, even exiled. Maybe these worm faces came from those that we see when deathblight takes over the body, finally uprooting themselves from their source, and cursed to roam the land between, being deathblight's horrid creation of life. And it's not just the worm faces that are spreading the death roots. Many signs can be seen around the lands between, all seeming to have echoes of Godwyn. His still, glossed-over eyes appear in the massive roots. The crabs above Leyndell are branded with the face of the Prince of Death, while the basilisks, although having fake eyes and all their other appearances in Dark Souls, have a much different depiction to them. They are the eyes of the Prince of Death. Yet there's one growth from the death roots that raises more question, and that's found beneath Stormvale Castle. Here we can find a familiar husky face. It seems like Godwyn's face is also here underneath Stormvale Castle, which is confusing because it's also beneath the capital. How is his body in two places at once? Found on this body beneath Stormvale is the Prince of Death's pustule, a fetid pustule taken from facial flesh. It is said that this pustule comes from the visage of the Prince of Death, he who used to be called Godwyn. As first dead of the demigods, it's said that he's buried deep under the capital of the Erdtree Roots. So it seems like this pustule is pointing towards Godwyn's corpse being at the Erdtree Roots, which does make sense. But the Godwyn under Stormvale appears more hardened, roots-like than the one we find at the capital. And a few, like Sanguinicis, believe due to this, the Stormvale corpse is actually Godwyn's original corpse. Roger might also believe this.
The misshapen corpse under Stormvale. That is a sacred relic of the Black Knives plot, as that famed night of assassination is known.
But we should never believe someone's word in a Souls game, especially in the lands between. This theory stems around the worm faces, which can be found high up in Farum Azula. Evidence of deathblight, these worm faces display a more noble depiction than their Atlas counterparts, but show that death is everywhere. These most likely form from Malekith, whom a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen from, with its shadowy powers influencing the Farum Azula. But Sanguinicis is more interested in another foe found at Farum Azula, the Banished Knights. Also found at the Stormvale Castle, these loyal knights are tasked to retrieve their lord, bringing about the Age of Destined Death through their pilgrimage to Farum Azula. Sanguinicis makes some comparisons to the Stormvale Castle's banner being a reference to dragons. The lightning spear details that long ago, Godwyn the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Fortisax, and befriended his fallen foe as an event that gave rise to the ancient dragon cult in the capital. but a lot of evidence of this theory just feels like jamming of pieces together. It doesn't seem to fit well. The body under Stormvale does seem to bleed, with others like the Scarlet King believing that this body could be of someone other than Godwyn. But the Prince of Death's pustule does seem to indicate that this is some form of Godwyn. As we've seen Godwyn's face plague the lands between, it's certainly plausible that even his deformed body is growing, the more rooty and hardy versions being grown by an ever-corrupting Erdtree. And Godwyn does look grotesque, not even human, even slightly fishy. Both corpses of Godwyn look like a mermaid, and if we were to look at his face, we could interpret it as a polypore, a fungus that grows on trees. This could yet again convey our mushroom imagery. But when looking at Godwyn's face closer, it seems to be more clam-like, and along with Godwyn's fish-like tail, it seems like there's quite a clear nautical theme. A small refresher, but in our second part of our Elden Ring Iceberg deep dive, we explored how Marika, Radagon, and a lot of the lands between were paralleled in the Ripley Scroll, one of the most famous manuscripts for alchemy, with the manuscript's purpose to create the Philosopher's Stone. Capable of converting elements into gold, the Elden Ring. As gold was the currency during the time of alchemy, it is thought that the Philosopher's Stone would collapse nations' economies, so it was banned, with research having to be done and recorded in secret, disguised as beautiful images. But the Ripley Scroll itself doesn't have any sort of imagery of fish and mermaids, but that might not be the only alchemical text that has shaped Elden Ring. Basilius Valentinus was an alchemist during the 15th century, but like the Ripley Scroll, it's thought that his works could have been used as a pseudonym for alchemists to record their forbidden work in secret. Like the Philosopher's Stone, Basil would work on discovering a universal remedy, extracted from the elements, known as Azoth. In their Azoth series, they have images depicting some sort of mermaid, the combination of the aquatics and man. Alchemy heavily centres on duality, and a mermaid is crucial to this, being dual in nature themselves. Half human, half fish, the combination of raw materials to create the Philosopher's Stone, or the Azoth, is created by the combining of elements of opposing qualities. So like alchemy, the abomination we see of Godwyn could actually be the creation of something new, Deathroot and Imperium, creating the Azoth. It definitely makes sense to be inspired by alchemy, but it could just be that, inspiration. And while we're talking about alchemy, this could be another explanation for unalloyed gold being pure. Sir Percival makes another comparison with Godwyn's body, and that's with Japanese mythology. As early as the 7th century, a creature with both human and fish-like features was found appearing in numerous Japanese texts. The Ningyo, which translate to human fish, look quite similar to how Godwyn is presented to the Tarnished. They were a magical creature who had magical properties, with any consuming its flesh able to live healthily for centuries. The most famous legend, known as Yabukuni, details a feast where Ningyo flesh was served, but those present did not want to consume it, taking their portions home or ridding themselves of the food, with a 16-year-old inadvertently eating some, living to be 800. But why did those at the feast not eat the Ningyo? Well, this flesh was also known to bring about a curse. Another legend describes a fisherman who, despite its pleas for its release, killed a Ningyo, feeding its flesh to his children. However, instead of longevity, these children grew scales and died. The Ningyo are seen as bad luck, with their flesh able to grant a long-lasting life, but could also bring about a curse of misfortune for those who try. This does seem quite similar to Godwyn's state. He does technically achieve longevity, but at a cost, with his soul dying, being left in an undead state. It could also be important linking Ningyo's flesh to the flesh of Miquella, which was stripped away. It certainly seems much more fitting than alchemy, and we should be ready to employ this same lens when diving into the Land of Shadows. Shadows are mentioned even less than mermaids in alchemy, but they could be drawn from other inspirations. Previously we were discussing Greek mythology and Persephone, and how her arrival and departure from the underworld could loosely be represented by the insects that we can find festering themselves in Deathroot. But it's not just insects that could be a link to this. Persephone's journey to the underworld is her entering the land of the dead. And this underworld is a world without light, dead of life, and light. Cast in immortal shadows, the state of death. Ancient Roman poet Virgil detailed in his 6th book of Aeneid, the Trojan hero of Aeneas travelling to the underworld. Like the Tibia mariner, Aeneas encountered a Charon, one who travelled between both the land of the dark and light. And they said, "Whoever you are, come to our river in arms. Tell me, even from there, why you come. And check your step. This is the land of shadows, of sleep and drowsy night. Living bodies I may not carry in the Stygian boat." This land of shadow, the absence of light, and the Erdtree is just downstream from us. And like Aeneas, we are eager to unravel its mysteries. You voiceless shades, suffer me to tell what I have heard. Suffer me of your grace to unfold secrets buried in the depths and darkness of the earth. It's been over 2,000 years since the story of Aeneas was composed by Virgil, adding to its mystery and beauty. I can't wait to see the mystery and beauty that the Land in Shadows has in store for us.